This week, we're going to be talking about the topic of fake news with particular reference to the work of a very interesting scholar media professional called Claire Wardle, who has produced some very interesting work and research on the different forms of digital fakery that we would find in online media, particularly in the news, and comes up with some very interesting typologies on the different ways in which digital media content can be seen as fake, and some interesting ideas about what can be done about that situation. So, Wardle introduces us to some very interesting and very useful and persuasive perspectives on the place that truth has in digital media environments. And broadly speaking, what we're going to be doing is using her work as a touchstone, as a foundation for considering how concerns about fake news sit within some wider discussions about truth that have been running through the humanities and media research for really quite some time. So, what we're going to be doing this week is thinking about a few things. Firstly, we're going to be considering evidence to the effect that digital media and the question of the relationship between digital media and the truth. We're going to be looking at evidence that suggests that this is an issue which isn't just academic, but it's really something that's captured the public imagination. This is really something that people care about. So this is another opportunity to take our work as media researchers and really relate it to things that the public care about. And I'm going to be talking mostly about Claire Wardle, but there are a few steps that we need to take before we get to Claire Wardle. Because to really appreciate the significance of her work, we need to understand how her work in many ways builds on concerns about facts, knowledge, and the truth that have been around for some time. So what I'm going to be doing is talking about the way that Wardle's concerns and interests in how we use facts to understand political realities are related to a couple of things, are related to the question of history. Where do facts sit within the study of history and the way that we relate history to the study of truth? Because we might think that there's a fairly straightforward relationship between facts and history. But if we look at how historians have traditionally discussed the relationship between facts and history, what we find is that the relationship isn't as direct as we might imagine. And then, second, as always, we're also going to look at the way that current concerns about fake news relate to interests and questions in media research that have been around for a longer time. And in particular, I think that we can relate Claire Wardle's work in a very interesting way to the work of my favourite sociologist, Howard Becker, and the early work that he did on black propaganda. There are a number of interesting connections between research on propaganda from the middle of the 20th century and current concerns about fake news. We could even say that fake news could be regarded as the child of, of black propaganda in some ways. But certainly, if we look at Howard Becker's work from the 1940s on propaganda, what you see is there are a number of really compelling parallels between the way that Becker defined black propaganda and how it worked, and the way that Claire Wardle talks about the effects of fake news. And then finally, we're going to be getting to the work of Claire Wardle herself and be talking about the way that she categorizes different sorts of fake news. But also, we're going to be thinking critically about her work because, in some ways, her work on memes in particular suggests two things. Firstly, suggests that truth isn't really the issue in some ways in fake news. And secondly, that fake news in the form of memes actually relies on audience participation, and in that sense builds on um, relationships between media content and audiences, which again have been observed for really quite some time. And then finally, we're going to be thinking about um, what Claire Wardle suggests we can do about fake news, and thinking about how we feel about some of her suggestions and relating her suggestions to broader problematic aspects of media culture in general, particularly the move toward seeing media regulation or seeing control of the media as something where the burden has been significantly shifted onto audiences and media users rather than the state. So, again, the overall point is that thinking about fake news is a way of connecting current digital concerns about how media are operating in society and, as ever, relating them to longer running issues in the humanities and media research, such that we can tell a story about fake news where it isn't simply a phenomenon that suddenly appears from out of the ether somewhere in the second decade of the 21st century, but actually is an issue that's important because it activates a series of concerns about the relationship between truth, justice, and democracy that have been in play for some time.